I'll say thanks in the beginning for this invitation. I've been listening to your podcast now and taking lots of different tips and tricks from people across different sectors. So I think it's a really great source of inspiration.
Hello and welcome to Obehi Podcast. I'm your host, Obehi A14, and I strongly believe that everyone has a story to share. Now let's get started into this episode.
A bit about me. I'm Sarah. I work as the global communications manager at an organization called Spark, and Spark is a international NGO focusing on providing job creation solutions for young people in fragile and conflict affected states. So that's a lot in the Middle East, in North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. And we do that in a number of ways through providing higher education scholarships for young people, also providing entrepreneurship support so people can start their own companies, and helping existing companies to kind of grow, all in the name of providing more jobs, because we really feel that it's people are less likely to fall into poverty or take dangerous migration routes if they have a job. I think we all want a job, whether you're a young woman or a refugee or wherever you are. I think that's what all young people are looking for. So I've been at Spark for around 6 years now. And before that, I have a background in psychology. I studied psychology in London and have done various jobs with Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and also within filmmaking organizations. So I'm a bit of a jack of all trades. I certainly didn't study communications or come into it from the traditional pathways. But I love it. You know, it's my it was really my calling, I think, this profession.
That's really very interesting, Sarah. It's interesting to know. Of course, we are going to be talking about communication and storytelling today. But it's good to dive a little bit deep into your personality, who you are, where you are coming from. Of course, this is storytelling in itself now. Okay. All right. So tell me, where did you grow up as a young adolescent?
Yeah, sure. I grew up in a place called Cornwall in the UK. And Cornwall is one of the most rural places. It's very beautiful, lots of fields and beaches. But as you can imagine, rural places are often very limiting for young people growing up. So as soon as I possibly could, I moved to the big city. So I moved to London, I think in 2013 to study. And throughout my career have kind of moved around a bit also. So I lived in the Netherlands for a number of years, also in Turkey and Lebanon and Israel and Palestine also. So have done various experiences working in the Middle East as well as in Europe.
So when you were a young adolescent, what sort of thing would you say actually makes sense to you? What did you spend your time on? Help us understand that.
Good question. Yeah, I think probably I speak for most communications professionals that we're all inherently very sociable people. So I spent a lot of time being very sociable, I'd say, working with, or not working with, but, you know, friendships were really important, and also growing up by the sea. There was a lot of time for going to the beach, surfing. Cornwall is the surfing capital of the UK. So that was a big passion of mine. Certainly not saying that I was any good at it, but I think you get a sense of maybe who I
Of course,
am.
you were spending time there, so you were good at it.
No, I don't think so. I was a bit of a wannabe surfer girl, but yeah, so that's kind of how I grew up, with lots of friends and family around.
Mm-hmm. All right, that's cool. And that at that time, what were you seeing in front of you as a kind of something you were going to spend your time doing in when you grow up much, something that you were looking towards in the future?
Yeah. I think, yeah, like I said, when you grow up in a kind of smaller town or a smaller community, you always look outwards for inspiration. And I think that's exactly kind of what happened to me. I was always very purpose driven. So I wanted to help people. I wanted a career that was benefiting other people and not only about making a salary. And my family are like all medical professionals. I was the kind of black sheep of the family that didn't go down the medical route. But I think that vibe of wanting to do something good for other people was always there. And so that's why as soon as I could, I started kind of volunteering, working with older people, seeking opportunities that benefited, the most vulnerable people in society. And that's kind of took me to work in NGOs and different charities, and to the various places where I've lived.
Mm-hmm. If you look back to your life now, is there anything that could have been pulling you or pushing you towards those things, towards this idea of trying to help other people, try to do something for other people, something that you can hold back to maybe in your family or within your neighborhood or friends? Or how did this spark happen that you wanted to do something for other people?
Um, to be honest, I can't really think of a key moment or a that made me want to do that. It's always been there. And I guess, like I said, it comes from being surrounded by family that want that, and being surrounded by a community that's very cohesive and supportive. So I think growing up in that environment enabled me to pursue this kind of a career.
Now, you choose to work with the NGO. Do you want to tell me how that actually started with you? Which was the first one you worked with? I want to understand the beginning stage in your working with the NGO now.
Yeah, sure. So I think my first experiences were with volunteering. So volunteering within schools, volunteering in Sri Lanka. I went to Sri Lanka to volunteer for a few months, and really loved, working directly with people, and having an impact. You being able to see the direct impact of your work, really. And then my kind of first international job was with Amnesty International, where I worked in Israel with African asylum seekers from Eritrea and Sudan. Um, and then from there it spiraled, really. I went to Human Rights Watch, and then have ended up at Spark, which is the NGO that I work for now, based in the Netherlands.
Is there anything that you learned when you went to Sri Lanka, you went to Israel, and working with the Amnesty International and meeting different people there? What did you learn working with these people?
Yeah, I think the impact is the biggest learning experience. I mean, I've said before that I come from a very small community, and so seeing, understanding the lives and the experiences that other people have had, and feeling very fortunate to have grown up in beautiful safe environment. This then grew this feeling of, well, I have been very privileged and fortunate to just be born really in a safe country, and feeling that I should use these privileges to support people that have not had the same opportunities that I've had. So that's why I'm so proud to kind of work with Spark, because like I said, everybody wants a job opportunity, no matter who you are. I think everyone on this planet is really keen to be independent and to grow their own businesses, maybe, or to have a stable income and work and be financially independent. So it's a really it's a cause that I really believe in, let's say.
All right. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. Now, you're working currently with Spark. Do you want to tell us exactly what that organization is and what it does? Then, of course, we are going to turn around to talk about storytelling and communication and how all this ties in into what you do. Help us with that.
Sure thing. Yeah, so Spark is an international NGO focused on job creation for young people. We're mostly focused on the Middle East, North Africa, and Sub-Saharan Africa, and we support young people, women, refugees, IDPs, the kind of people facing vulnerabilities where they're living. And we support them to enter higher education, to grow their own startups, to grow existing businesses, to scale them, all in the name of job creation, really. Because we believe that when people have stable income, good job opportunities, they're less likely to fall into poverty. Less likely to fall into poverty and take dangerous migration journeys.
All right. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. Now, I want you to tell me a little bit about storytelling, how you might be using storytelling in the work that you do today.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Stories, I think for any communication professional, stories are your bread and butter, really. And for NGOs, that often means stories that revolve around individuals or stories about communities that we're supporting. I mean, we don't have goods or services to really sell. We don't have products. And so for us, stories are the best way to communicate the impact, the importance of the impact that we're having in the world. And we use the images and written stories or video stories of our participants of our programs to aid our communications, our fundraising, our advocacy objectives. And I think, storytelling really helps to make all of those things more powerful when there's a human face. But I think, many of the stories that NGOs have used or have worked with in the past have done some damage and some perpetuating of stereotypes, particularly when thinking about the developing world, and portraying people as disempowered. So that's a lot what my work today focuses on as the kind of global communications manager at Spark. I feel it's really my duty to make sure that these stories are told ethically. We're being nuanced. That the storytellers or the contributors themselves, that the right type of consent is given to help undo some of these damaging stereotypical portrayals of, particularly, I think we've a lot in the Western world anyway seen campaigns of poor African children with flies in their eyes. It really disempowering type of imagery and type of storytelling. So organizations are, of course, these days, there's a big conversation now and taking a lot of care to kind of source and promote authentic imagery from people in developing countries, and try and shift or make this power imbalance of the NGO communications professional who's asking for the photo and the person who's having their picture taken much more of an equal power dynamic. But there are still a lot of steps to be taken. But I think maybe I can highlight a few of those steps.
Oh, sure. You could highlight some of those steps. I think they will be important for us to better take this story further. But I was just thinking, storytelling by NGO creating stereotypes. I find that to be interesting in your explanation. Why is that? Do you think maybe this NGO are making mistakes? Let's use Western NGO for example, because you are a Westerner, you are in the UK, so I believe that when you're talking of NGO, you are mainly referring to Western NGO that are working in other country or continents, like African in this case. Why do you think this NGO creates story or use storytelling that creates stereotypes? Is it that they are making mistakes? They don't know what they are doing, or can you say anything about that?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I think it's a combination of things. I think you rightly mentioned there that a lot of the big international NGOs, so like Save the Children or World Health Program, or big Western donor-funded organizations. I always use the acronym that the NGOs, international NGOs, are weird. And weird stands for Western educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. And I think that accounts for most of the development or humanitarian organizations, but it also accounts for most of the people that are working in those organizations. So I'm a white English speaking British woman, and I'm telling stories about young refugees in the Middle East or young entrepreneurs in sub-Saharan Africa. And what does my lived experience have to do with the people that I'm telling stories about? And I think that's where a lot of unconscious bias comes in. And I can talk a bit more about that. But I think there's a few other issues that are also happening. And I think traditionally NGOs, particularly when fundraising, have relied on fear or relied on sadness, of trying to trigger these types of emotions in their audiences to promote fundraising. So you saw that back in the 80s with huge Live Aid concerts, and that was to raise money, I think, for the Ethiopia famine. But all of this was the kind of trigger or the start of that type of communication. And I think over the years, people have recognized that this is perpetuating negative stereotypes, but the resources within organizations, so that's like financial, but also manpower, and with charities and NGOs simply lack resources, and so there's not that much will to change. So it's a very, very slow process in terms of changing, or communications teams trying to persuade upper management to change, and pumping new financial resources into trying different methods, when what NGOs often hear from audiences is is I've been in focus groups, when I hear things like, oh, I wouldn't give to that child in this photo because that child's holding a pencil. They don't look, needy enough, or they don't look poor enough for me to give. So I wouldn't give to this this ad, let's say. Yeah, which is then the NGO then feels pressure from audiences to not change that type of communication. So they still go for the kind of fear or the empathy response. But it's changing in this kind of digital age. I think if you look at evolutionary psychology, you see that our brains as human beings haven't really evolved since the time that we were hunter-gatherers, where you might only the most scary thing that might happen to you is that you see a predator like a lion or a bear or something, and you would see that maybe, I don't know, once a week or something, and that would trigger your fight or flight response. But now, in the age of Homo smartphonicus, where we're all completely attached to our mobile phones, we're constantly bombarded with news stories that are often really negative. So constantly bombarded with, updates about flooding, about wars, about economic crises, about refugees, and all of this this negative or scary input is really damaging, and we can't handle it in terms of you see it a lot now in charities and NGOs. You hear about compassion fatigue, and that's really because people are switching off. They don't want to look at these stories that make them feel bad, and people are just swiping past. So I think those are some of the kind of main reasons why this type of storytelling keeps getting perpetuated within this sector.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that, Sarah. I appreciate your explanation. So now it appears that the so-called poor people of the world are seen as objects that need to be used. So this object be used so that money can be made at the end of the day. Of course, there are different dimensions to the story now. There are a lot of, I think there are more than 30,000 Western NGO in Africa today that are trying to resolve one problem, to resolve the poverty in Africa. Somebody will say, well, it's a joke. It's not going to happen. NGO does not resolve poverty. That is not how poverty is resolved. So this more than 30,000 Western NGO in Africa need to try to convince the donors somehow that what they are doing is right. But at the end, somebody need to try to understand, are this NGO really working for these poor people? I want to use that poor very well with a capital P so it can make sense. Are they actually resolving those poverty problems so that at the end of the day, the NGO can then be out of job because now their job is done? These poor people can then become rich, or they are actually making themselves, the NGO, in this case, be specific, Western NGO, making themselves rich at the expense of these poor people in Africa. Of course, we can also be in Asia, it's the same, but just pay attention to Western NGO and Africans.
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. I think I certainly can't speak for all Western NGOs in Africa. There's in terms of communication, there's certainly when NGOs are perpetuating stereotypes or portraying as Africa. Often, you hear people say that Africa is a country, or portraying people, portraying Africans as poor, I think is already a mistake, is already going into the wrong direction. Africa is a continent full of, rich, talented, bright, innovative people and organizations. I think where NGOs can have, Western NGOs can have greater impact, and this is also a big discussion within the sector, is on shifting the power. So at Spark, we really focus on it. So rather than being a Western NGO, taking Western funding from, let's say like USAID or the European Union or the governments of Europe, and then designing a program of what we think works or what we think will be helpful for people in developing countries. It's proven much more effective and sustainable to instead co-design projects with local organizations. And these might be kind of community organizations or service providers, but really making it local. So working with people maybe even from the communities that you're trying to support, because they have the contextual knowledge and the know-how of how to reach certain communities, how to reach the most vulnerable. They know what's needed. And then we often work at Spark as a broker, kind of a middleman, essentially, between Western funding, big donors, and local organizations. And it's a bit of a two-way street. So you're co-designing what's needed, and then you implement it together with a local organization. And where they lack skills, or where they lack, for example, they might not have a very strong communications department, or they might have not very strong, they might not be able to apply for big EU grants themselves. Maybe they've never done that before. That's where Spark, or a middle organization can support with training, or support them in areas where they are not so strong, so that like you said, we can eventually there should be no need for a Western NGO. It should be taken care of by local organizations or national organizations, whatever you want to call it.
That is very interesting, because now I'm imagining that maybe this NGO, maybe they were set up in Africa, set up by African people. Maybe they want to access the same fund. I'm more than sure that they will not get this fund, whether it is the money coming from USAID or the European Union. They will not give them the money. But if maybe there is a Western NGO that say, okay, I'm going there to Burundi or to Sierra Leone or to South Africa to help eradicate HIV, they will give them the money. Why do you think? And of course, what we find out at the end of the day, because this is not something that just happened 1 year. This has been happening for years, for several years. So if we have at least half intelligence, we should be able to understand it, because all the documents, they are also there. Is that the money that they collect to help people in Africa actually end up remaining in Europe. Only a few percentage of it actually go there, where you see sometimes they dig a pond and things like that. I am not saying all Western NGO are the same. I'm not saying no Western NGO work in Africa, but in the generality of it, the money that is raised remain in the West. They never go to Africa. So the question is this one. Let me put it in a very simple terms. Do you think if the objective really was to help the people, the poor people, if these people, because they are not sick, they are just poor, they don't have resources, no? Let's say we teach these people how to organize themselves. They don't need the middleman. the European want to help them, fine. They just send them the money to help themselves because the NGO now are set up by the Burundi, are set up by the Sierra Leone, and they are the one asking for this fund. Do you think they will get the fund?
Yeah, I think you're right that it's an incredibly complicated process to apply for some of these huge funding opportunities. Like most of the organizations winning these grants are well established, very they've been going for multiple years. They have departments kind of dedicated to with specialists that know how to apply for these kind of grants. And that's I work at the NGO level, and then there's the donor level, right? And that's there has to be a shift. So their donors have to make it more accessible for smaller organizations without these big resources of experts and writers and that kind of thing, so that they can also access the funds. But in the meantime, I think that's where NGOs or Western NGOs can come in and play a role in supporting smaller organizations to be able to access funding opportunities like that, because that's really where we need to put our money where the mouth where the money is. What's the expression?
We'll put our money where our mouth is.
Money where the mouth is.
Mm-hmm.
So that if we really want to localize and give power back into the hands of developing countries or to communities, so that they can have impact, we have to that's where the money needs to go directly. Yeah, you're right.
And unfortunately, that money never goes there. What we see, one time I was talking with a friend of mine. It's an Italian. He wanted to, he so love Africa, no? The point is that there are a lot of Europeans who so much love Africa and they want to help, because what is happening between Africa and Europe is a complex situation. And of course, it can be explained also in a very simple terms that for more than 500 years, somehow we have bought into the idea that Europe is going to help Africa. I don't know how we managed to get the idea, but it is that Europe is helping Africa. So Africa, you don't need to worry. Somebody's coming to help you. These are the European. And for these years, somehow we managed to understand that Europe is there to help Africa. Africa just need to receive this help. But it doesn't work. We can see that it doesn't work, and it's not going to work. Everyone is going to help his or herself. Now, there are a lot of Europeans who really have this sincere, because Europeans are also human beings, who have this sincerity in their heart to just go there and help. But it is more complex than that. Sometimes by helping, we even go on and start perpetuating the same trouble that is already created there. Okay, this guy I was talking about, no, he said he want to just join an NGO so that he can help. No, he want to, because you cannot understand why a people will just be continually suffering like this. Why is it like this? So he started to apply for different NGO. Italy is full of NGO also, not just like in the UK and some other countries in the West. What he began to see is that when he go to some of these NGO, he see that a lot of big cars are parked. He was beginning to wonder, but why? He think that these are poor people that are trying to help poor people in Africa. Why are all of them driving these big cars? Of course, he haven't done his research well enough to understand that that the NGO are big multinationals. They are not actually poor companies. They are not poor society that are just trying to help. So this is where I think it becomes even very complicated for us now to understand.
I get what you're saying, and this is a very I think this is the perception, and maybe the perception of Western NGOs in Africa especially, that you have these kind of private compounds, right, where people live, and it's and it happens, and even worse things happen. In fact, you see these huge scandals with Oxfam and in Haiti, and a sexual abuse scandal. So it certainly is a huge it's a problem, absolutely. But I don't think that all Western NGOs can be painted with the same brush. I think that there's a huge amount of positive impact. I think, you're right that especially in some countries, there's a huge amount of aid dependency. So people don't, they feel that, if they work with an NGO, that they'll, there's not enough other opportunities around for them to be able to kind of become more independent. But I think in terms of communications, you're seeing a big shift now with people taking steps to try to avoid this type of communication and this type of storytelling, when to really be conscious of consent, of telling nuanced stories about people and communities, and also providing platforms for people to tell their own stories. I think that's much more of an effective way for NGOs to be able to get the point across, and not be able to, and not have to show people as disempowered or poor, because that's just not the reality in the end.
All right. Now, do you think if they don't paint the image like that, they will still be able to get the fund at the end of the day?
Yeah. So I think, like I said, these days you're seeing compassion fatigue all the time among audiences. So people are much more reluctant to hear stories or watch stories about sad things, about poor people, about things that are going to make them feel bad. I think people just want to watch cat videos, in my experience. But there are many ways then. For let me give you an example then. So there's Thomas Coombs, his name is. He was the head of brand at Amnesty International, I think. He has developed a framework called hope-based storytelling, and that it provides kind of 5 narrative shifts. So when you're a communicator or a storyteller or whatever, you can it allows you to reframe stories in a different light. So, for example, rather than telling stories about fear, you tell instead stories about hope. Or rather than saying as an organization what you are against, you instead tell what you're for. What are the initiatives that you support? The same goes for there's problems. Instead of talking about problems, talk about solutions, and instead of talking about threats, talk about opportunities. And the last one is, instead of talking about people as victims, talk about people as heroes, or as ambassadors, or and this framework for storytelling was adopted by a lot of NGOs. And there's an organization in the Netherlands who I think would say that this is a bit of a bad thing. There's from the Expertise Center of Humanitarian Communication, and they say that actually NGOs then went in the opposite direction. So it was very negative campaigning to very deliberate positivism. So like only showing smiling faces and telling the happy stories. And I think that's also not good, because no one is one dimensional or two dimensional. Like we're human beings. We all have different sides of life, or different stages of life even. And to tell only one part of a story is to not do the story a good service. So I think what we need to do is be much more nuanced in storytelling. This is where the solution is really in having a balanced stories. There's a few there's a few examples where, I mean, telling nuanced stories in a digital age is very difficult, isn't it? Because you're trying to capture people's attention in seconds now. Like, people are only reading the headlines, and if that grabs their attention, then they might read more. And the same for, filmmaking. You have only a few seconds before somebody scrolls past again. But there are really innovative ways of storytelling. For example, if you go to Instagram and you type in equiano.stories, it's an Instagram account. These are highly produced vertical film stories telling the story of a young boy during the transatlantic slave trade. Beautifully shot with amazing actors, but all told through Instagram stories. So you click through and you see the journey of this young boy on a slave ship. And I think there's also, Ava stories. It's a similar thing. It's a story of a young girl during the Holocaust in Europe. But so what I'm trying to say is that I think we think of it as a barrier that, it's very difficult to tell a nuanced, balanced story when you have to be very fast. But there are many, many different creative ways that you can try to do this.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. Now, you see, this take on to another important part of it, part of the narration, which is the humanization of the object or the subject of our story. And I think this is where most NGO or Western commentators on Africa actually should pay more attention. In that, stories are very powerful. It can be used to malign a people. It can also be used to help a people. And at the end of the day, it's not just the money. It's not only the money, but we can actually empower a people by the kind of story we tell.
Absolutely.
So I want you to speak to me more about that. What do you think NGOs, Western NGOs in Africa should do in terms of the story they tell about their African neighbor, if you want to call it? Because I usually say, and I believe it is true, that Europe is a neighbor to Africa. It's not from another continent. Sorry, it's not from another planet. We are just two people separated by a stretch of water. You cannot tell me that in this side of the water are human beings, in the other side are animals. We are all human beings. We should humanize ourselves in our story. No matter what might be the ulterior motive, what we might need to gain as a company, or whatever it is, let's first of all humanize ourselves. Help me with that.
Yes, I completely agree with you. I think NGOs can do a number of things. I think at Spark, we try to see ourselves as providing a platform rather than telling people's stories for them. So I much prefer to, for example, if we get invited to high profile conferences or global events or forums, often, then people want to hear from the CEO of Spark, but we often try to push instead for participants of our programs or for our local staff to go instead of him, so that the real voices of can tell the impact. Same goes for media opportunities. It's always much better to have somebody else tell how great you are rather than you tell other people how great you are yourself. I think that's we're always pushing that, the young people that we work with, that they go into the limelight, they tell about their experiences with Spark rather than the other way around. I think the other thing is the importance of language. And this comes up a lot when thinking about this subject, but the power of language and thinking and the fact that words really matter. And I think firstly, the languages that we communicate in, there is already this linguistic imperialism that most Western NGOs are only communicating in English or in French or Spanish, or I think Portuguese also is pretty big. And that ignores, huge numbers of people. So, taking steps to provide content or stories or social media content in local languages. And I guess then if you go even deeper, I mean, we're talking in English now. So to give some examples in English, like if you dive into some of the words that are really common in NGOs, you find that they are like colonial, militarized, capitalist, also, they're really othering. So for example, like we often hear the term boots on the ground. This is said all the time. I'm going to the field, or working like with target populations, or the fact that you're capacity building. And the word, this is the biggest offender. I think anyone working in an NGO will relate to this, the word beneficiaries. And if I take this example, so the term beneficiaries, I think sounds in English like, innocent enough. But if you dive into, what it's used, the word is used to describe the people that are supported by NGOs programs. But it's the linguistic implication of it. It describes, it implies that people have no agency of their own, that they are, are reliant on aid, that they are disempowered. And it also suggests that the NGO themselves are like that they are providing a benefit to the person, which is of course not always true. So that's, I think, another step that NGOs can take to, really address this balance in storytelling. And I think the last thing, or the most important thing, I should say, is working with local people. I think for a long time, NGOs or charities, whatever, have flown in crews from the West or from Europe or from the US or something. If they want to collect content, they fly in a filmmaker, they fly in maybe a celebrity to be the TV presenter and talk about young kids in Africa or something. And then it's about the process and also the product. So in the process, you have to work with local organizations. And I think I started at Spark, and we were doing just that. We were flying in teams of filmmakers or photographers that were from the UK or from the Netherlands. And that nuance then in when somebody is telling their story to someone that they don't know, that someone that speaks a different language to them, they're from a different community, you just don't get the rich story, and you don't get all of the nuances that come. So for example, I had one example when it was the beginning of my career making a film, and I was working with a lot of different contributors from different countries, and one of them was a young Muslim girl who wore the headscarf, and so I did the filming with her. All was good, she was consenting, she was willing to be part of this film. And always good. So shot some footage with her, took it back to Amsterdam, and started working on the footage with a Dutch editor. And then we were kind of going for ages, debating about music, and we had the perfect shots, and we thought everything was good. And it was a campaign that was due to start on the anniversary of the organization. And it just so happened that this girl, she messaged me out of the blue and kind of asked to see the film as it was. And I was super proud of it. So I sent her the link the day before that it was supposed to be launched, thinking that she would also be very happy with it. And then of course she came back and she said, like, Sarah, this is really bad. I'm so sorry, but there's an image, there's a shot in the video that I really don't like. And it was a moment where the wind had caught her skirt and had blown so that you could see part of her leg, and she felt very uncomfortable about this. And this incident really brought it home for me that I think three things: that, like, basically consent is fluid. So she might have consented to her story being told at the time. And, I explained to her how this footage would be used and where it would go and that she could see it and those things. And she consented at the time, up until the moment that she didn't anymore. And that was a really important thing for me to realize, was that, it's really important to make sure that consent is understood, and also really important to respect it when someone changes their mind. Their circumstances might change and they want you to remove a piece of content or to not use their story anymore, and that's really important to respect that. In this case, we changed the footage so that her leg wasn't visible, and she was fine with that in the end, so it was okay. But the second thing it taught me was that this really wouldn't have happened if I'd have worked with a filmmaker who was was also Muslim or was from the same community, because he or she would have already spotted that this was going to be an issue. And the third thing I realized was that it's so important to involve people in the telling of their own stories. Like, I had not shared any of the drafts with her. She hadn't seen any of the footage. It was only by chance that she contacted me on the day before it was supposed to go out, so it was okay. But I really felt bad about that I had just neglected her as a contributor and she was so generous in sharing her story. And that's something that I always take with me now, and always, I think, involving people in the telling of their own stories is the only way that we can tell kind of ethical and inclusive stories.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate your sincerity, Sarah. You see, when you were explaining before, at the point you were saying that that the NGO they appear to use the terms and terminology of the colonial time, and sometimes as if they were looking at a land that need to be conquered. But really, that is the way it is. I think the most Western NGO, I'm not trying to say all, I mean most, are actually the new colonialists of Africa, and of course they are helping the bigger power to occupy the role, because they have a lot of role to play in the education. They have a lot of role to play in the concept of the white savior, and we are going to help you. We are going to help you. Don't worry. Like I was saying before, no, that I am helping you. I'm helping you. It's force. In that, if we really want to find a solution, let's sit down together. You need to ask me, what do I want? Maybe I don't need to fall into your understanding of development. You're going to ask me, what do I understand by development? What do I really need? Because I think the concept of development that is designed, I'm not saying that anybody need to go without food or need to go without electricity or things like that. In fact, if we even leave the people alone, by now they would have figured it out that they need electricity. They will be able to get electricity for themselves instead of just be taken along to, hey, come and feel here. This is your position. This is what is for you. This is for you. Just follow, just follow. The people don't understand where you are taking them. They are not following. We can see that they are not following because the model is not based on them. It is everything is foreign to them. But because I think poverty is a weapon. In that when you are too poor, you don't have the means to be able to live. The person who is giving you the means to live dictate everything for you. Therefore, even though you don't like it, you are not able to resist it. You are not able to say no because you don't have an alternative. And this is very dangerous, and it is highly evident in Africa. And this is why I say again that a lot of Western NGOs have a lot of work. They have work to do because the ordinary work that was supposed to be done is not done. So you're not coming to say, I bring solution for you. It makes more sense. If you were bringing NGO from America to Italy, you will get less. It will not make more sense because the people have the basic to be able to live. So this is what I think that might mean that their term of in the field, really they are in the field. They are working, they are NGO, they are non-governmental organization, yes, but in between the line, they are actually governmental organization because the money is coming from the government. In most of the cases, the money is coming from the European Union. The European Union is a government. US aid, the money is coming from the United States, from the government of the United States. Okay, so that you can also get the donors that are not part of the government. So saying that you are going to deal with people in Africa and you are a non-governmental organization, not all the cases you are actually a non-governmental organization. You are a governmental organization. So that is why they use those terms that they are going to the field. They are going to, because it's the same terminology, it's the same thing, it's the same routine that people have been used to during colonialism. So I just wanted to clarify that is actually the role that most Western NGO actually occupy in Africa. All right, now, having said that, I wanted to say something to me about story, because I like story. I like it a lot. How much can you be truthful in the story that you tell? Because before I was talking of humanizing the story that the NGO tell or should tell, so that the people at the receiving end are not just seen as object, but they can also be seen as human beings, even though they might need help. Now, how much can we say the real story, but also say in a way that it can also convert, in a way that it can also help. It can also help the person who is listening to us to bring it to our side and then act upon our offer, but without degrading the people who the story is about. I know it's a complicated one, but that is the question.
No, I think it's a really important question. I think, there's a great TED Talk called The Danger of a Single Story by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. And it's all about the fact that, stereotypes are not always untrue, but they are always only one part of a story. And so that's what I mean when I say that we need nuance and balanced stories, diverse stories. And you see sometimes NGOs telling lots of different stories about one person or one community to kind of create a more three-dimensional picture of a person or a community, because there's no one thing in a person's life. And I think from various research, there's great research by a woman called Jess Crombie with Save the Children called People in the Pictures, and it's a research over I think 4 countries, and interviewing people that had their picture taken or their story used, and they often, when they looked back at those stories, felt it was a sad time in their life, or it was not even sad, but a particular time in their life. But life moves on, and people do not stay refugees forever, or people do not stay poor forever, just like people don't stay in the same job forever. So it's about telling nuanced and balanced stories. And last year Spark was nominated for the High Flyer Award by the Expertise Center for Humanitarian Communication for a film about a young entrepreneur in Burundi, and it was entirely shot by a Burundian creative agency, and uh, it's a film about a young entrepreneur in Burundi, and it was produced entirely by a Burundian creative agency called Akeza, and also uses the local language, the Kirundi language. And so in that sense, it's a much more true story. It's not, he's not speaking in English. It's not a film about him. It's a film, with him. It's developed with him. And it's also a very balanced portrayal of, his work life. You hear from his employees, how he started this business. So I think we need more stories like that are like not only telling one part of a person's life, but are actually making attempts to tell a balanced story.
Thank you so much for that. That's important. I remember when we first talked before during our pre-interview, you did make mention of ethical story. I think I like that term a lot. Do you want to expand on that a bit?
Yeah, I think it combines all of the things we've been talking about, really, like ensuring consent is given, proper consent, where, a lot of times when NGOs take from people, they have them sign a consent form, and then that's it. And then they have the rights to use their story in whatever way. And that's not enough. That's not good enough. And people, you need to really take time to explain to people the many ways in which their stories can be used. For example, you might take photos of someone, and then these photos might end up on social media, they might end up on a website, they might end up in brochures or flyers. So you need to make sure that people know what they're consenting to. And it's also about trying to provide a platform for people to tell their own stories. There doesn't always need to be an agenda to it or an angle to it. And I think part of ethical storytelling is taking these steps to work with local people, to think about language, to think about nuance, and then slowly it's baby steps, but slowly we come to a slightly more ethical, inclusive, and nuanced storytelling world.
All right. Thank you so much for that. Now, what do you really like about storytelling? Like in your work, look at your work, for example. What interests you about storytelling?
What interests me about storytelling? I love that. I love the emotion of it. I think and stories are so powerful, and it's so innate in our kind of biology. So I think whenever I give a training or something like that, I always start with these images of cave paintings, and these things are like 64 or 40 to 45,000 years old. And humans have just been telling stories for such a long time, and it's so important to us. And these handprints on cave walls, and paintings of animals on cave walls, I think it's such an emotional, evocative thing, and it's just clearly so part of biology, and it has such a powerful impact. It can have such a powerful impact if you do it in the right way. And I think that's why I think of my job is so special and such a privilege to be able to work with people that are ready to tell their stories, and they might be difficult stories, they might be happy stories, but it's our responsibility as an NGO to be able to do that in the most ethical way possible.
Now, say maybe some people want to connect with you. What is the best way to be able to reach you, or maybe work with you or learn more about you?
Yeah, thanks. I have a website. I think that's probably the best way. It's sarahlpage.com. And yeah, you can contact me there, or also on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So yeah, I would be happy to hear from anyone, that listens to this.
All right. Thank you for that, Sarah. Now, what would be your final thoughts to conclude the conversation that we have had today?
Yeah, the stories have the power to make or break communities. I think we are surrounded by stories that are trying to break us, to polarize us. Whether that's the West versus Africa, or NGOs versus governments, or that we're in a world now that it's very divisive. And I think the power of a hopeful story is unmatched, and those are the kind of stories that I really try to create.
Thank you so much for that. I really do appreciate the conversation. I really do. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Is there anything that you would like to say to conclude that I didn't ask you?
No, that's great. I thought it was a really interesting conversation.
All right. Thank you so much.
If you enjoy this podcast, make sure you subscribe so you never miss any of our future episodes. Rate and review Obehi Podcast and share with your friends who might need it. I remain Obehi Ewafo. Thank you so much for listening, and talk to you in the next episode.